We start walking through all the religions of our day. All right, I shared the top 10 of them with us last week. What are the top 10 religions of the world? All right, and then of course, if we think that the rapture of the church is very near us, therefore the 7 years of tribulation are going to be ushered in immediately following the rapture of the church, which again can be at any moment. And so therefore, this world can experience the tribulation next year, or even by the end of this year. Right? That's the reality. And so if that's the case, then this religious system has to already be in operation. It has to be taking place right now. And again, there are millions and millions and millions of people that are religious. And in fact, another term that can be used is spiritual. Right? You can be religious and lost. You can be spiritual and lost. Absolutely. We find that throughout the Scripture. So let's look at how they announce this religious kingdom. Beginning in verse number 8, let me read through verse 13. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads, back what we read in verse number 3, are 7 mountains on which the woman, the beast, sit. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen. 1 is, the other is not yet come. It is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th. It is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns, back in verse number 3, which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So here in this section, we see that the angel, back in verse number 1, is announcing the leader of this religious system. And very clearly in verse number 8, it's the beast. Well, who is the beast? That is the Antichrist. That is the one who is absolutely, powerfully, demonstrably opposed to God. So, if that's the case, I find it difficult to believe then that this religious system has any form of Christianity whatsoever. I find that difficult. And the reason I bring that up, because you may, after this message, or maybe you have already read and studied, or maybe have listened to other people or whatever, or have read books or whatever, and come to the conclusion that, hey, this has to be the Roman Catholic Church. Most books that were written as commentaries to the book of Revelation chapter 17, most of them would attribute this religious system to Roman Catholicism. Now, I realize you may be sitting here who's had a Roman Catholic background. Maybe you came out of the Roman Catholic Church and you trusted Jesus Christ as your Savior, and you said, you know what, yeah, that kind of does make sense, because I remember what some of the things they said. I am going to say, okay, now, and it really doesn't matter what I say or what I think, okay, because what matters is not what you think either, okay? What matters is what God says. So therefore, it's very clear that all of the things that we're talking about and coming up with are our surmisings. Okay? It's just us trying to figure this out. And the reality is, if God wanted us to know what it was, He would have just told us. But guess what? If He would have told us, then nobody would have lined up with that religious system, okay? If God said, and the beast is a Roman Catholic Pope, would anybody follow the Roman Catholic Pope that had any semblance of saying, I just want to honor God with my life? They wouldn't do that. I do not believe that this is any form of Roman Catholicism. Now, do I have disagreements with Roman Catholicism? You better believe it. Why? Because of the deity that they give to, or I should say, remove the deity that they give to Jesus Christ and do not see Him, or they look at Mary and say that Mary is the mother of God. Well, no, Mary is not the mother of God. She is not immaculate. Mary needed to be saved just like you and I needed to be saved. Right? She's a sinner that needs to be saved by grace. And I'm not going to get into Roman Catholicism and the problems or the differences that I have with that. But I want us to again, keep in mind the bigger picture here. So John is being told what this kingdom is, and simply this. Just one phrase or one sentence I want to leave with you, and that is this. This portion explains how, not necessarily what, this kingdom operates under the leadership of the Antichrist. So, John is only being told how. He's not being told what. And again, that's why I'm not going to be dogmatic on what the religious system of the Antichrist is going to be. You can be dogmatic. There are others that are dogmatic. I'm just not willing to go there. Okay? And again, I'll tell you who I think or what I think kind of lines up with this. Alright? So, notice how this kingdom is going to operate. He very clearly tells us that here's the beast in verse number 8. That's the Antichrist, because we already know, right, based on what we've already studied about the Antichrist, that thou sawest, he was, meaning he was alive, and then he was killed, and then he what? He is alive again. Right? John makes that clear in the end of verse number 8. When they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. So he died, or he lived, he was killed, and then he was raised again. Right? And again, it's exactly what the Antichrist wants to be. He wants to be everything. He wants to look just like Jesus Christ as much as he possibly can. And if Jesus Christ was alive, was then killed, crucified, and then rose again on the third day, then hey, Antichrist is going to say, I want to do this too. I need to be like this so that people can begin to start worshiping me. And remember what the pseudo-prophet does. The false prophet is going to direct people to worship the beast. And that worship is this false religious system. And so the beast is referring to the Antichrist. And notice what the reality is. He ascends out of the bottomless pit, and then he's going to go into perdition. Right? I mean, he has his final mission. And his final mission is going to be the bottomless pit, or the perdition, and he's going to be there in the lake of fire forever and ever. We'll see that later on in our Revelation series. Right? And what do they do in verse number 8? They behold the beast. That goes right back to this whole admiration, right? There are people who are going to admire the perversity of this religious system. Verse 9. Here is the mind which hath wisdom. So here's how God announces this religious system. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. The 7 heads are 7 mountains. That's why, again, we call this apocalyptic literature. So what God is doing, God is saying, okay, listen, I want you to see, I want you to picture this, these 7 heads, but I then am going to explain those 7 heads are simply 7 mountains. Right? It continues on. And there are 7 kings. Now, the 7 heads are not 7 kings. The 7 heads are not 7 kings. Do not be confused by that. What are the 7 heads? 7 mountains. And then there are what? 7 heads. And those 7 heads are not the 10 horns. There are 7 kings in verse number 10. 5 of those kings are fallen. 1 is present. The other is not yet. Why? For he is yet to come. And when he comes, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th of those 7. And is of the 7. And does what again? Going back to verse 8, it goes into perdition. Alright, so let me give you a little bit of the understanding here. And I'm going to try to clear this up as well as I can, so at least it's not as muddy as maybe it is right now when you just read it. It's still going to be muddy to you, okay? It's going to be muddy to us until we get to glory. Alright, I'm just going to make that clear, okay? So what are these 7 heads or these 7 mountains? Now obviously, this is then when people start to have their opinions and their thoughts, what they think this means. What we do know is that the 7 heads are mountains. Now we start looking, okay, what in the world is a mountain? Right? I mean, what are the mountains? And obviously there are people who will take this and very clearly align it to the 7 hills of Rome. Rome is known to have 7 hills. Right? And so Rome that's why people say, well, this has to be a Rome. So it's a Romish type of religion. And but the problem with that is this. That's just one possibility. I mean, you can start taking, okay, what are some other mountains? Right? I don't believe the word mountain here is the literal mountain or the hills, because the 7 hills of Rome are not mountains whatsoever. That's why they're known as hills. I think the mountains here refer more to a system. And what John is explaining, or what is given John in explanation form here, is again how this beast is operating within this religious system. Obviously, there is a political nature. So now you have the combination of church and state. Right? In essence, what we would say here is the church is running the state, and the state is running the church. There is a marriage there. That's why I believe in the separation of church and state. I'm so glad I live in America, because we have separated from the church. The church does not have any being, any saying over how the government shall operate. Now let me be very careful. That does not remove faith. Be very clear. I am not saying that our faith should not intersect the government. Oh, it ought to. When the government comes to us and says, or the government comes to me as a pastor and says, listen, you need to start marrying a homosexual couple. And if a homosexual couple walks into your building and they ask you, would you perform a marriage ceremony for us? And you say no, you are going to jail. Guess what, folks? I'm going to jail. Because I am not going to allow the government to dictate what my belief system is when it comes to the Word of God. And that just goes along with the whole abortion element and so many different things. Okay, so I'm not saying that our faith ought not intersect the government. It ought to. And we ought to stand firm on the truths of the Word of God. Now, go back. So he says, these 7 mountains upon which the woman sits or operates. Now, again, these 7 heads, these 7 mountains can refer to perhaps what we would say various empires. Right? And empires that, again, are what? Are opposed to God. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, right? I mean, so many of these empires are antagonistic towards God, including Rome. Right? But we know that this is a religious political system that Antichrist is operating under. Verse number 10, there are 7 kings. Now this is again where it gets interesting. I do believe that as John is writing this, John is understanding this in his day. Right? At his present time. 7 kings. 5 of them have already fallen. There's one that is present, and the other is not yet come, meaning he's going to come in the future. The 5 fallen, I believe, refers to the Roman emperors at that time. Caesar Augustus or Julius Caesar, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. Those 5 have already fallen. There's one that is present. That is the one who cast John unto the Isle of Patmos, Diocletian. There's one who is yet to come, which obviously is of the 7, meaning of that Roman actual, or if you will, empire, and I believe it's going to be a reuniting of the Roman Empire, or at least the thoughts, the strategies, the mentality of the Roman Empire. He is going to come. Verse 11 says, and the beast that was and is not even, he is the 8th and is of the 7. Okay, so the 7 kings here, again, 5 of the Roman empires, or emperors, one Diocletian that is present, and the other is yet to come. The future, is that going to be the Antichrist? Well, the Antichrist is going to come from there. So, again, we don't know exactly how that works out. Verse number 12, then he says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received, notice this, no kingdom as yet. Those 10 kings in verse 12 are not the same of the 7 kings in verse number 10. Okay? So these are going to be kings at the time the Antichrist comes on the throne. Again, if the rapture is going to happen very soon, imminently, then what? These 10 kings are already in operation. They're already around. Now people say, that's where America comes in, right? Isn't this America? No, I don't believe so. Because I believe, again, this Antichrist is going to come out of some kind of European Union, Confederation of Europe. It's clear that he's part of that 7th one, right? So, verse number 12, again, the 10 horns or the 10 kings have no kingdom as yet, and so some have made it pretty appealing that these 10 kings are perhaps what is known as the European Union of today, the European Confederation. Germany, Luxembourg, Greece, and the list just goes on. And you can pull up the 10 confederate nations of the European Union. Is that possible? Absolutely it's possible. Is that true? I mean, Pastor, do you believe that that's true? I don't know. You know, and again, God says, I don't have to tell you who these 10 kings are, or who these 10 nations are. But obviously, and we'll get into this later on as we continue working our way through Revelation, we're going to see what happens with these 10 kings. Right? I mean, all of a sudden, Antichrist, he's on the throne. He is leading the world. And there are 10 nations that are going to come kind of behind him or under him and say, hey, you are a leader. You are fantastic. We love you. You are incredible. We're so glad that you are the world leader. But something's going to happen. And again, this is the parenthetical. You say, when does this happen during the tribulation? We're not told when. We're just told it's going to happen sometime in the tribulation days. I believe it's going to be towards the latter half of the tribulation, which are the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. And so verse 12, it continues on. The 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet in John's day. Which again, I believe, because we are on the cusp of the rapture, I believe these 10 nations are in operation today. And there are kings or presidents or leaders of those 10 nations currently. Notice that they received power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Just short. It's just short. Verse 13, these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So they are united with the Antichrist, this world leader. Again, I've said before, the world leader here we're talking about is an actual person. Right? We're not talking about a system. This is an actual person, an individual who will be the leader of the world. And these 10 kings will certainly submit themselves to him in union or in unison as he is their world leader. So John has been told, okay, here's what's happening. There is going to be this church state, this coming together, this religious system is going to have world leaders that are going to combine in that one religion. So now, here's the question. What religion is this going to be? As I said last week, the fastest growing, what we're told, the fastest growing religion of the world today is Islam. You say, is the Antichrist a Muslim? All I can say is it's very positive. Most of the European Union nations are Islamic. I don't believe it's going to be a religious system that has any close ties with Christianity. I believe it's going to be a religious system that is going to have millions and millions of people who are adhering to it. I can only put together some thoughts of those 4 points of what makes this religious kingdom admired by John. When you talk about its persecution against Christians, right? You talk about its perversity, right? I mean, wow. I mean, it seems to fit. However, I don't believe it's going to be the kind of Islam that is present today. Because I think what's going to happen is, I think it has to be a combination of some things. And so I believe that New Age philosophy, mentality is going to be combined with this religious system. If you understand anything about New Age, do you realize that New Age has crept even into the church, into the true church of Jesus Christ? Many of us don't even realize how New Age affects us and impacts us. Do you realize that most television shows or most movies you watch have a New Age philosophy? And I'm not talking about a modernism. I'm not talking about culture type of stuff. I'm talking about a religious underline, an undertone. Remember, the devil doesn't just come right out and say, hey, I'm evil, I'm wicked, I hate God. He transforms himself into what? A minister or an angel of